Morning, everyone, and thank you to everyone joining us here today. Just to introduce myself, so I'm Louise Bridget. I'm a director in the Plymouth office, working in the not-for-profit sector, and I'm really delighted that we can welcome so many of you here today. One of the reasons we want to be here today is just to give you some reassurance and comfort around some of the many issues that we know our charity clients and others in the sector are facing at the moment. We very much recognise it's an ever-changing world, and we're hoping today to give you some information and some reassurance on areas such as governance and some of the key fundamentals of running a charity. So if I just go quickly through the running order. So if we have a look there at the agenda. So I'm thrilled that we have Anna Jay, Managing Director of Public Leader Appointments with us, and she's going to share her thoughts on boards of trustees and all matters relating to trustee recruitment. As you'll see there on the slide, we were due to have James Evans with us to talk and go through a legal update, but I'm delighted that Amy Laver for Tozers Solicitors is here today. She's very valiantly stepped in to help us, as unfortunately James wasn't available, so please be kind to her. We're delighted that Amy's able to join us. And then finally, we've got Darren Perry from Francis Clark, who's going to talk us through some charity governance issues. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So the session today is being recorded. There is a facility on the webinar for you to be able to put questions in the box, and I'd encourage you to do those throughout. Both Anna and Amy do need to leave shortly after their session, so if I could just encourage you to put those into the Q&A as we go through. We will try and cover off as many of those as we can at the end of their sessions. We're due to finish about 10:45, and that's it from me. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Anna. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for welcoming me today. So today I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to public leaders' appointments, talk about the role of the voluntary sector and the critical role it plays in society, a bit about diversity on boards and how we need to address this, and recruitment to the sector, specifically thinking about trustees. So very brief bit around public leaders appointments. So I've worked in executive search for about 20 years now. I established public leaders appointments in 2017, and I predominantly work with charities, social enterprises, public sector organisations, and the public-private interface. I work with organisations nationally, sometimes internationally, regionally, and I'm based in Cornwall myself, and I do work with lots of charities down here in the southwest. Predominantly work at executive and board level, so chairs, trustees, non-execs, etc., and chief execs. And then I do some additional work through either myself or through associates around skills analysis, board development, recruitment, etc. Something that might be of interest to some people who are here today is the good governance courses, which I deliver. Got 2 courses coming up in September, so you can go onto my website if you'd like to hear more about those. So I thought it would be helpful to start with a bit around the role the voluntary sector plays. And I really like this quote from an ex-minister for the third sector, which is the third sector can play a vital role in developing high quality services the public rightly expects. Charities, voluntary groups and social enterprises have particular strengths, such as reaching the most disaffected people, finding innovative solutions and offering a personal touch. In a time when the lines between public, private and not-for-profit sectors are becoming more blurred, the third sector plays a significant role in addressing some of society's most pressing challenges. And a few really interesting facts and figures here. So the charity sector on its own is valued at over 20 billion to the UK economy, and there are around 900,000 jobs within the sector. So it's therefore really a significant part of our economy. In 2022, the combined value of volunteering and donations came to £23 billion, which represents 0.8% of the UK GDP. That 23 billion is actually larger than sports and gambling and the UK tourism industry combined. So obviously third sector is not just an auxiliary to government and business sectors. It serves as a force for change, innovation and social transformation, and its impact goes beyond numbers. The tenacity and resourcefulness of voluntary organisations has been demonstrated over recent years in the face of unprecedented challenges, from really small kind of micro-sized charities to large national and international organisations. The ability to adapt to changing circumstances has been a hallmark of the sector. COVID-19 has obviously underscored the sector's agility and resilience. While some sectors really struggled to respond to rapidly evolving situation, voluntary organisations reacted swiftly to meet emerging needs. I was actually a trustee of a charity myself during COVID, and the pace at which we were able to mobilise the sector, bringing organisations together to respond to the crisis was really impressive and quite frankly amazing. 2024 has brought high inflation and interest rates, which presents huge challenges for the sector. While navigating the increased demand on services due to cost of living, also political unrest with local elections and the impending national election places additional challenges. Elections cause delays with decision making, and that's around things like contracts and funding. And there's also increased focus on what charities are saying and campaigning about, so that nervousness there from some charities. However, in a world where inequalities persist, the voluntary sector stands as a beacon of hope. So a bit around diversity on boards. In the Charity Governance Code, the Charity Commission says that diversity in the widest sense is essential for boards to stay informed and responsive and to navigate the fast-paced and complex changes facing the voluntary sector. Boards whose trustees have different backgrounds and experience are more likely to encourage debate and to make better decisions. So what does diversity actually mean? Obviously, I'm sure that most people are aware of the protected characteristics which are listed there, but there are other areas for boards to consider when they're making appointments to trustees. So lived experience. So when we've talked about lived experience, we're addressing either structural disadvantage or a particular cause. For example, not necessarily in a charity, but in a housing association, lived experience of poverty or housing insecurity would be really relevant to a board of that housing charity or a housing association. Class, socioeconomic class isn't straightforward, as it's subjective and often self-identifying, and people actually experience mobility in their lives. However, there are still many examples of boards that are entirely made up of those who are affluent with privileged backgrounds, which in itself isn't obviously an issue, but can mean a significant disconnect sometimes from the services that are being delivered. Neurodiversity covers conditions such as autism, ADHD and dyslexia, amongst others. This can alter how a person problem solves and considers different issues, even the risks they spot when they're looking at key decisions. Geography. Geographic diversity covers representation from different areas. Trustee diversity in a local charity could cover representation from different parts of the city, the borough, or the neighbourhood. Areas with greater density of lower income households might be less well represented on a board. It could also relate to national charities, primarily headquartered in London. Often they exclusively have London trustees, which isn't always beneficial to them if they're a national charity delivering services to different areas across the country. Skills, knowledge, networks and experience. So this covers a relevant mixture of soft skills, ways of working, knowledge, professional backgrounds, lived experience and networks. Every trustee you appoint must have skills, knowledge, networks, experience that are useful to your organisation, but ensuring diversity on your board will augment this. So some recent figures indicate that only 36% of trustees are female. 8% trustees are from ethnic minorities, despite comprising around 14% of the population. A third of trustees are under 50 and 0.5% of trustees are under the age of 25, many of whom are believed to be in youth or education-focused charities, which means the figure for under 25s in mainstream charities is much lower. 25% of trustees from households below the national median for household income, and 29% of charities said their boards don't reflect the communities they serve. And there are actually no national statistics on board members with characteristics such as disability, sexuality, or things like caring responsibilities. Trustee diversity isn't a nice to have. It's not an add-on, and it certainly isn't a favour to the people that are comprising that diversity. It generally benefits the organisation, and you can see a quote there from the Charity Commission. So looking at the recruitment of trustees, so according to a recent report, 75% of charities struggle to recruit trustees, 10% of trustee vacancies are advertised, and 90% of charities report that they recruited most of their current trustees through word of mouth and existing networks. Closed trustee recruitment is one of the key reasons that many boards lack diversity. We know and often surrounded by people like ourselves, whether that relates to our professional field, education, attitudes, ways of working, where we reside in the country, or our economic class. When our pool of talent is our own circle, we're limited and likely to recruit in our own image. So open recruitment. Why do we encourage open recruitment? Firstly, access to talent. Without having an open, inclusive recruitment process and reaching out to diverse candidate groups, you're cutting off access to huge segments of your communities. There are so many talented, passionate people who want to commit their time and give their expertise to your charity. If you don't go out to public recruitment process, it's unlikely you're ever going to uncover these people. It makes you closer to the cause. Trustees with relevant lived experience of challenges your charity addresses or which affect the stakeholders of your charity will understand the realities the organisation works with. Having this input on a board is critical to good decision making. Credibility. Accountability to the communities you serve is really important. Having diverse representation, particularly from those who've used services, live in the communities you serve, or that appear to represent your organisation, what you do and why, will connect you much more effectively. It's also very high on funders' agendas too, which should be of note to many people there. Discussion and challenge are at the heart of good governance. In order to create this, you need people who are different from each other. You should have a board made up of people who are from different circles if you want discussion and debate in the boardroom. Groupthink is a far greater risk on boards that aren't diverse. Open recruitment and board diversity move away from operating in an echo chamber. So how do we go about open recruitment? Ideally, you'll have a formal strategy that outlines the direction of the organisation, or you may just have a shared understanding of trustees. So, for example, you might want to deliver more services online, expand diversity of who uses your services, launch a new type of service, or improve your marketing. So make sure that you've kind of understood what your future strategy is. Do your trustees have the main skills, knowledge and experience, including lived experience, to tackle those challenges? Take into account things like succession planning, who might be leaving in coming years, do a skills analysis, what's missing. You need to identify what's missing in terms of skills and experience, and that should form the basis of your trustee recruitment. So what's next? Remove barriers from that recruitment process. So when we're deciding on the requirements for your new trustees, remove unnecessary barriers, such as stating things like they must have previous board experience, where that's not a necessity. They must have certain qualifications, a degree, things like that I've seen in previous candidate briefs. Is the language you use in adverts off-putting? So if you put something like significant senior experience or 10 years experience in, if that's not necessary. Gendered language as well. You can use gender decoding tools, which are readily available online. Things like meeting times. So if your meetings take place at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday, for example, the chances are that parents of the school run will be ruled out. Evening or weekend meetings might exclude others, but meetings during office hours might be difficult for people who work shifts or for those more junior in their careers. The fact is, there's no real single time that suits everybody. You're going to need to work out with your board what suits most people. If you aren't advertising that you pay expenses, it will discourage applicants who may have been willing to take on an unpaid trusteeship but can't afford to be out of pocket. So thinking about things like, paying train fares or paying for petrol, paying parking expenses, etc. Can people get to your meetings? So meeting virtually at least some of the time can be a really helpful option, although that could be difficult for trustees without digital access. Providing options to people is just always helpful, so be flexible and be willing to comprise. And then be honest about the time commitment. Does it have to be the same for everyone? Time commitment for trustees can be higher in small organisations where there are no or few staff or just volunteer-led organisations. And trustees are likely to need to be more operational. So always be honest. Don't lure people in on the basis that they won't need to give much time and then find out that this is almost like a part-time job for them. Looking at how to recruit, create an advert which makes no assumptions. So don't assume people know all about your organisation or the role of a trustee or the time commitment. Create a clear and concise advert, ideally that's supported by a candidate briefing document which supplements that and provides more detail about your charity. Outline the specific skills and experience you're looking for to strengthen your board and be clear about the time commitment, as I said before. Also, it's useful to put in things like dates and times of upcoming board meetings, etc. And also I put in, if you've got a timetable around recruitment interviews, always add that as well. You can do things like creating short videos to bring your charity to life. It showcase beneficiaries, staff, board members, etc. And as I said before, you can use decode things. So, society has certain expectations of what women and men like, how they differ, and this seems to seep into the language that we use. Looking at advertising, so use your existing assets, your website, your newsletter, mailing lists, volunteer databases, partners, websites, etc. Websites, your own website, so and is obviously somewhere to start, but also look at websites like Reach Volunteering, Charity Jobs, Getting on Board, Do It. All those are national websites, which most of those are actually free for charities to advertise on. Your social media, so use your Facebook, your LinkedIn, Twitter, Insta. Also, not just that of your charity, but also ask your staff and your other board members to share via their networks as well. Looking at local resources as well, so volunteer organisations, local community centres, hospitals, civic centres, universities, diversity groups. All of those places are really helpful for advertising your board vacancies. You can look at professional bodies and groups, so business networks, professional associations, etc. And then there are many diversity platforms, so things like Black on Board, the Young Trustees Movement, Women on Boards, Queer Trustees, and others. As I would obviously say this, so work with a recruiter. As I mentioned earlier, Public Leaders Appointment specialises in board recruitment and development, and I can support you with one or all stages of the process that I've described today. I can also always happy to have a conversation just to give you some support and advice with no commitment at all. It's worth noting that in April alone, I appointed 25 trustees to 5 very different charities, 3 of which are in the Southwest and 1 is a national charity. So hopefully that demonstrates the track records that I'm able to uncover the right people for those organisations. Remember your agree your approach to interviews and any questions in advance. And remember that a successful trustee interview will require a balance of clarity, structure, and flexibility. You want candidates to be in the best position to reflect their ability and their experience and ways of working. I quite often share interview questions for trustee interviews in advance. This is not a test. You're not looking to catch them out. What you're doing is just trying to encourage them to think about things like governance, things like how they challenge fellow board members, etc. Thinking about induction, onboarding, and training, and this is going to be covered in a later session. But a good induction is not going to happen overnight. In fact, it can take kind of 12 to 18 months for a trustee to get fully up to speed, whether or not they're first-time trustees. Have a plan before you appoint your new trustees. You can easily lose momentum if you aren't ready to welcome them once they've been appointed. You can do things like using a buddy system with existing trustees. I suggest providing training, internal and external, formal courses, as well as meeting, visiting services, being coached by others. I mentioned the course that I run. I ran it this week in person in Cornwall, and it's taking place online on the 19th and 26th of September. And that's all around developing trustees, understanding a good governance, so they're equipped with the skills and understanding they need to make a really valid contribution. Ask trustees what they need and offer opinions. I always ask that question at the interview stage. What would you need to help you to embed onto a board, whether that's specific training in terms of finance for non-finance trustees or whatever that might look like. Arrange time with the chair, so one-to-one sessions with the chair and ideally with the chief exec as well. Spend time reviewing key documents with trustees, so articles, strategy document, code of conduct, charity governance code, etc. And then plan annual strategy days, so half days, a couple of half days or one day, ideally in person, and make that an opportunity for trustees and chief exec and exec to spend some time together as well. And also have some kind of social event. A charity that I'm working with at the moment, they invite their trustees to all of their social events. They invite them to their monthly team briefings as well if they'd like to come, so they get to know the organisation well, but obviously recognising the boundaries of trustees and staff. So whilst a lot I've talked about today might seem like very much like common sense to many of you, I hope that some of you will take something away. Please feel free to get in contact with me via the details there if you want to have a more detailed conversation. I actually launched my new website this week, so hopefully you can find lots of interesting and useful information there. And then on the final slide here, I've just attached some links to some useful websites where you can find things that I've just referenced. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anna. That was really interesting, and I'm sure there's lots there that people will be able to take forward. And it's great that we've got your contact details on there if anyone wants to speak to you afterwards or in the future. I don't think we've got any questions that have come through on the Q&A just yet. I'll just do a quick. Oh, yeah, one's just come through. So if I can just cover this one with you, Anna, please. So how do you balance social event costs against the responsible use of trust finances?
Oh goodness. How do you, so social events versus that? I think that I mean, for example, I was a trustee myself, and I have set up 2 kind of community charitable projects, and we often are very cheeky and ask people to provide sort of venues for free. The network of charities down here in Cornwall is phenomenal. So there are many charities which have beautiful venues which they're willing to offer without any cost or with very minimal cost. We have if you're very cheeky and you ask local businesses, they might provide refreshments, etc., for you if they're passionate about your charity. Ask people who are your supporters, ask people who are in your team. People can bring in one charity that I work with, they've got some amazing bakers in their team, and they bring in cakes and things for their and they make food for their fundraising events. So I think it's ensuring that you're looking after your staff. I think anybody who is going to donate to an organization will recognize that staff need to be looked after and trustees need to be looked after and cared for. It's just about not spending all the budget on social events or even fundraising events, etc. It's about balancing that out.
Thank you, Anna. Don't think we've got any other questions at the moment, but obviously we can forward those on to you, and I'm sure we can make something work after the session. But no, just thank you once again for joining us, and we'll move on to Darren. No, sorry, it's Amy next with the legal update.
Thanks, Louise, and morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Laver. I'm a specialist charities lawyer in the charity team at Tozers. James Evans did the in-person session of this, and he's unavailable today, so I'm stepping in. So please forgive me because they're not my slides and it's not my script. So if I stumble, it's because I haven't practiced as much as he has. So I'm very sorry about that. Just to pick up the question that Anna just answered about balancing charity finances, it's for the trustees to minute, consider, talk about the best use of funds and justify that. And there is nothing wrong with spending money on events for staff as long as it's proportionate and in the best interest of the charity to do so. So I hope that helps, just reiterating what Anna said there. So today we are going to cover 3 main topics: a general update of the charity law to include the latest implementation of the Charities Act 2022, which mainly came in, or finally came into implementation at the beginning of this year. Secondly, we'll have a look at the importance of keeping your charity's governing document up to date and what charities need to bear in mind when they are looking at making changes. And lastly, we're going to touch upon the issue of dealing with old restricted funds and permanent endowment, and what can be done to increase flexibility in the use of those funds where the restrictions have become problematic. This has become something of a hot topic recently, especially among charities which have older governing documents and may have very historic endowment funds. So just in terms of the changes brought in by the Charities Act 2022, hopefully most of you are aware that the Act is now in force, and it's come in dribs and drabs over the last 18 months or so. that's been frustrating for everyone, waiting for the new bits to come in, and the Charity Commission have been, or government actually, have been slow to announce when it was coming, so sometimes new things came into force with very little notice. Plenty of useful things in the Act, but nothing particularly earth-shattering or requiring charities to make huge changes in how they do things. The whole idea behind it is to make charity compliance a bit simpler. And so when charities encounter certain situations where there are charity law compliance implications, trustees may find, and indeed be a little bit surprised, that things are a bit more straightforward than they used to be. The last phase of implementation came in on the 7th of March this year, and that means now that most of the Act is in force, with just the proposed changes to the rules on ex gratia payments to come in at some point later this year. That's because there seems to be some difficulty about that generally within the government and how it best should be implemented. I think there are some people who are less keen on it, and therefore it's taking slightly longer to work out how best to do it. So we're just going to highlight a few points from the latest changes which I thought were most useful. Firstly, many charities have been through a merger or incorporation process will have been advised by someone like me at the time to retain their old charity entity as dormant, still to be kept on the charity register, just in case future legacies or other gifts are received specifically made out to the original charity, and to guard against the risk of that legacy being lost to the charity if the old charity entity had been dissolved. This has led to lots of charities maintaining dormant charities on the register, which is not really ideal because it increases admin and cost and sometimes causes confusion to the public. For some years, we have had the Register of Mergers at the Charity Commission, which was intended to deal with this issue by ensuring that gifts made to the old charity are automatically applied to the merged or newly incorporated charity. But it wasn't great. It didn't work properly in the case of some wills, particularly older wills, which were drafted in a particular way. And so charities which were lucky enough to receive legacies have tended to keep their older charities open in existence just to maximise the ability to capture these legacies. The latest changes to the Act have made this largely unnecessary by reducing the risk that a gift made out to the old charity will be unable to be applied to the new charity. So I anticipate that many charities will now look to register the transfer, whether by merger or incorporation, at the Charity Commission's Register of Mergers, which will then have the effect of removing the old charity from the register. Slightly technical, slightly less interesting point about property documentation. Sorry, can we go back? Thank you. About property transaction documents around leases and transfers of freeholds that involve charities, either where you are selling or surrendering a lease or taking on new property. It's mainly for lawyers to look out for, but the various legal compliance statements trustees must make in these documents have changed, and you as trustees are making them, so you need to be happy that they're the correct ones. So if you or your lawyers have been using standardised documents for property transactions, just need to make sure that the compliance statements are updated accordingly. And hopefully the land registry guidance has been updated, so you can have a look at that if you're not sure. Thanks, Ruth. It is now possible to apply to the Charity Commission for consent for a trustee to receive or retain payment for work completed for the charity, where the Commission decides it would be inequitable for the trustee not to be paid for the work done. This goes further than the previous rules, where the Charity Commission could only authorise future payment situations and had no power to authorise a payment that retrospectively made. A caveat to that, likely only to be granted in exceptional circumstances and where no other legal power is available to the charity. the Charity Commission do seem to be keen to not encourage reliance on this, and would clearly prefer that consent applications are made and granted before the work is carried out. You may need to give an explanation as to why authority was not asked for prior to the work being carried out or the trustee being paid, and what steps the charity is intending to make sure that you don't have to keep making these type of retrospective applications. It might be helpful in a scenario we sometimes see where a CEO unexpectedly or abruptly leaves, and the best person to step into that is one of the trustees on an interim basis, and you might need to wait a few weeks or months, depending on the Charity Commission, to approve their trustee employment. So the retrospective arrangement might be able to be used in those circumstances until the Charity Commission can catch up with your needs. Is your charity's governing document still fit for purpose? Can I go to the next slide, please? Sorry, thank you. We're going to look at the governing documents, and perhaps I could invite you to ask yourself a question at this stage. When was the last time your charity reviewed its governing documentation? I would ask for a show of hands, but I'm not sure that I can do a poll or use the technology adequately for that. It was easier in the room. If the answer to that question is more than 5 years ago, or maybe even 3 years ago, we would recommend having a look at it and dusting it off, have another look at it to make sure that it's still fit for purpose, and importantly, accurately reflects what you do as a charity now and how you are doing it. You'd expect me to say this as a lawyer, but it is really important that the governing document is fit for purpose. We see all sorts of problems arising when a charity is trying to operate under an ancient document that hasn't been updated for ages and doesn't do what it is needed to in the current circumstances. Listed some of the common issues that we see here, just picking out some. The most important clause in your governing document is the objects clause. Sets out what you are there to do, and it's common for charities to experience what we call mission creep, where your purposes and activities have drifted away from what your objects say, and that can get trustees in hot water with the Charity Commission, as it risks charity funds being used for the wrong purposes, and that is a breach of trust. We often see charities operating governance arrangements which are contrary to what their document provides for example, how your trustees are appointed. If your governing document says trustees should be elected at an AGM, then until you change how that trustee is appointed, even if you don't have a wider membership, you should be appointing your trustees at an AGM. Sometimes there are provisions which are just not necessary anymore. For example, compulsory audit provisions where the charity does not meet the audit threshold, is unlikely to meet the audit threshold. We have seen a number of issues where charities are spending money on audits that just aren't required. And again, that isn't a good use of charity funds. In the last few years, I don't know whether it's COVID or whether it's just becoming more to our attention, but we have become more aware of problems where working relationships between trustees have broken down irretrievably, and the trustee concerned just cannot be persuaded to resign. They are right and everyone else is wrong. Dealing with difficult situations such as these is made harder if you don't have a clear power in your document for the board to remove a trustee in those circumstances. And I think in any review, it's also worth asking the question whether the underlying legal structure is the right one. There is no point in spending a lot of time and trouble and money updating a government document if essentially you would really be better off changing your legal structure first. For example, incorporating if you are currently unincorporated and the trustees have concerns about personal liability and risk, but also applies to charitable companies, some of which we have seen decide that actually charitable incorporated status is better for them. Thank you, Ruth. The good news is that the Charity Commission have recently updated their guidance on this and have now helpfully split it into separate tailored guidance for the various types of legal structure, which makes it much easier to follow. Normally, CIOs and companies limited by guarantee can update their governing documents by resolution of the members, and normally a 75% majority vote is required. However, there are some elements of your governing document which will require prior Charity Commission consent to changes. For example, if you are changing your objects in a way which alters your charitable purposes, if you are changing your dissolution provisions, or if you are changing your trustee benefit provisions, that will normally all need Charity Commission consent. Consent can be applied for online through your My Charity Commission account. Hopefully nobody is still suffering the nonsense that we had last year, where it was almost impossible to access your My Charity account without spending an hour on hold to the Charity Commission first. Thank you, Ruth. So the Charities Act 2022 has made it easier for unincorporated charities with outdated governing documents to change them. There is a new general provision allowing unincorporated charities to amend their governing documents, bringing the position broadly into line to the rules that apply to CIOs and charities limited by guarantee. This is a useful change, as up until this point, many unincorporated charities have not been able to amend certain provisions in their governing document without going through a complex legal process with the Charity Commission, involving significant time and cost, and then only in very narrowly defined circumstances, which basically involved the Charity Commission creating a scheme with significant delay because the Charity Commission are not quick at the moment. This is important because, as we understand it, a significant majority of registered charities, possibly up to 2/3 of charities registered with the Charity Commission at this time, are still unincorporated. In addition to the powers of amendment that are already, this is in addition to the powers of amendment which are already in the governing document, so you should always check first. If you are using the statutory power, this means the trustees will be able to make a wide range of changes to their document without Charity Commission consent. Charity Commission consent will be needed in the following circumstances, as you can see: changing your charity's purpose, including changes purposes of designated land, or allowing trustees, members, or people or organisations connected with them to benefit from your charity. Changing what happens to your charity's money or property if you decide to voluntarily close it. Changing restrictions that may make property permanent endowment, which we'll come on to in a minute. Make a change that affects the rights of third parties. Making a change that would require the approval of a third party had you made it using the power already existing in your governing document. In some cases, the Charity Commission has the power to require you to make a public or give a public notice before they will give consent to your changes. If you are changing the purposes, the Commission will only give their authority if they are satisfied that your new purposes are in the best interest of the charity. in that case, they will consider, as far as is possible and desirable, whether the new purposes are similar enough to your original and current purposes. So if you are making only minor changes, they are more likely to be easily approved. If you are making wholesale changes to what you have been doing for the last 100 years to something entirely different, the Charity Commission may not be very happy about that and may ask you to set up a new charity instead. The new guidance that we've referred to makes it clear that you will have to give particular supporting information to the Charity Commission, and if you're wanting to make a change that requires Charity Commission consent, you will have to be prepared to put together a fairly detailed case supporting why the change is needed, and it is usually important to demonstrate that existing beneficiaries are not going to be adversely affected, and it is also quite helpful if you've carried out some sort of internal consultation. Again, as a final plea, and I would say this, wouldn't I, but I would strongly advise getting legal support on any proposed change or updating your governing document, if only to avoid spending money unnecessarily where it's not where a change is not required. Dealing with old restricted funds and permanent endowment, and this is something that we do see from time to time, and actually a bit more at the moment. So people looking to change the purposes of a restricted fund because they are no longer appropriate or have become too inflexible, or looking at permanent endowment funds where only the income from the fund can be spent, and the trustees consider that it's in the best interest of the charity for some or all of the capital to be spent. Not an accountant, don't want to stand on the accountant's toes, but legally restricted funds are funds, assets held by charity on legally binding terms, which require the charity to use that fund or asset for certain specified purposes, and so are not available to be used for the general purposes of the charity. There is a difference legally in where permanent endowments or funds are designated as permanent endowment, because those funds are held and the charity is required to permanently keep that asset and not spend it. So for example, for an investment fund, you have to keep the capital but can spend the income, or for functional permanent endowment like land, you can only use that property for the specified purpose that it was given. Sometimes an asset can be a restricted fund and in permanent endowment, and essentially where trustees have assets of this nature, they should treat them as a charity within a charity and should only be used in accordance with the terms given. Next slide, if that's okay. Thank you. Almshouses are a typical example of this, where they often operate under very old historic governing documents. They have significant investment funds held as permanent endowment and therefore are only able to use the income. But they want to utilise some of the capital funds to improve their provision or to buy new almshouses to meet or increase demand. So what can be done? As said previously, you really should review the basis on which the funds are held, because sometimes they have been accounted for, or there's a misconception that they are restricted or permanent endowment when actually legally they don't meet the definition, and therefore you can do what you would like to do with them. If that might require some detailed legal analysis. If wanting to change the purpose of a fund, then it's likely that you would need to use the statutory power given under the Charities Act to amend the governing document as outlined before and apply for Charity Commission consent. We have seen that given. If you would like to spend capital of a permanent endowment fund that is held as investment, if the market value of that fund is less than 25,000, trustees can resolve that fund, or at least a portion of it, can be freed from the restrictions and can be spent as capital, and no charity commission consent is required for amounts under 25,000. If the market value of the relevant fund is over 25,000, then the trustees can pass a similar resolution as above, but they then must send the resolution to the Charity Commission with a supporting rationale, and the Charity Commission have 60 days to agree or not. There have been instances where that has not happened within the 60 days, and the Charity Commission have just written to you and said, yep, okay, fine, it's passed. That's not necessarily ideal from a trustee's perspective, but there's not really very much you can do about it. You can also borrow against your permanent endowment fund as long as it's not designated land. You can now borrow up to 25% of the market value of the fund, so you'd have to get a proper valuation. There's no need for Charity Commission consent if repayment of that borrowing is to be within 20 years, but you would need to go to the Charity Commission if you had undertaken this and then were unable to meet the repayments. And obviously any borrowing should be shown in your accounts. With any proposal to expend permanent endowment, trustees should consider the purposes of the permanent endowment and the purposes of your charity, and assess the long-term as well as the short-term needs. So you should not use this as a quick fix to get you out of a hole. The Charity Commission will expect the trustees to be able to demonstrate that you have undertaken significant research and analysis of this, and that you have carried out the balancing exercise between your short-term needs and your long-term needs. But what we would say is that the Charity Commission are open to these types of application, and I've seen consent given in a variety of different scenarios using different justifications. So it is definitely worth considering if you have any of these old funds that are not doing what you need them to do, if you think a more effective use could be found for them. That was a count through. There's Darren looking happily on the screen at you. I'm not sure if there are any questions. Apologies if that was rushed or anyone missed anything, but you can always get in touch with me afterwards if you have any relevant questions. Sorry, Louise.
Thank you. No, not at all. Thank you. That certainly wasn't rushed, and thank you for doing such a fabulous job of stepping in at the last minute. That was really clear. Certainly lots of food for thought there and lots of useful information. It's quite technical. It's tricky, but I think that was a really clear analysis of what's gone on and what might help people on the webinar. We do have a couple of excellent questions if you're happy to just answer those. So I think the first one you covered. That's great. The first one I think you covered actually after the question was asked. I think you covered quite a lot of it, but just it's on the governing document being fit for purpose. And the question says the charity specifies males only. I'm assuming that's beneficiaries. Can this now be updated in brackets easily? And I guess that's the million-dollar question.
There's not, as with every question, that depends. I mean, is it specified males only for a particular reason? Is that reason still valid? For example, is it a sexual violence charity where women or other men may not be, could not be beneficiaries? Can it be updated easily? You can change your objects via the Charity Commission route. You'd have to give your justification for it. It would depend on your reasons and your justification as to how easily it could be done. I mean, the main problem with the Charity Commission is that it just depends who you get on the day in terms of timeframes. I've put in applications that have been turned around in 48 hours. I've got others that I'm still waiting 4 months for. So it just depends what you're being asked, what you're asking, and who is being asked it, really. But I would be happy to have a chat about it outside of this if that was helpful.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think as you say, it's worth asking the question and exploring further. Another couple of questions actually. So the next one, it says it may be a silly question, but it absolutely isn't a silly question because it is confusing. So why are there so many different types of charity structure? I find the differences between them incredibly confusing. You are not alone.
No, that's right. So unincorporated charities are usually historic or small, where that is run by a small group of trustees who have not felt the need to incorporate, may not have any employees, may not have any land, is a low risk charity, doesn't have a huge income, those sorts of things. That was how it started. So that and lots of those will have been created by trusts in wills, so will have been unincorporated for just by reason of how they came about. If you wanted to be incorporated historically, you had to set up a company limited by guarantee. That involves dual what's the word I'm looking for? Dual filings. So you have to file at the Charity Commission and at Companies House. And the introduction of the charitable incorporated organisation was to try to assist with that, insofar as charitable incorporated organisations give you the incorporation protection that a company gives you, but you only have to file at Companies House. Does that help?
That was really useful, thank you. And I quite like the complexity; it keeps us on our toes. It's never dull working with charities.
It's never dull. No, it's never dull.
No. And then just a final question: what would you do if the summary on the Charity Commission website does not agree with the actual governing document?
Interesting. We need to check you don't have a bigger problem, insofar as that the Charity Commission doesn't think that you're doing something that you think you're not doing. You can apply to change that via your My Charity Commission account, but you wouldn't really need to be sure that you're not requesting a change of objects or something that requires consent at that time. I put in an application 18 months ago to change something on the website, still waiting. And every time I ring or chase, I would just get a, yeah, we're working on it, and it will come back to you. So
reassuring to know that actually auditors and lawyers aren't always the slowest at responding. I'm not sure it should be a race to the bottom, but anyway.
Anyway, yes.
Thank you for that, Amy, and thank you for all the questions. Keep them coming. And again, you'll know where to contact all of us after the session. Amy, thank you very much for that session. Thanks. And now it is over to Darren.
Thank you, Louise. Good morning, everyone. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Darren Perry. I'm one of our directors based in our Truro office, primarily looking after charity and not-for-profit clients. So for the next session today, I've been asked to just have a look at some practical governance points. Now, good governance can take many forms, and what is right for one charity may be very different in another. However, I'm going to cover off a few of the topics that we get asked about and see in our charity client base. So I'm going to have a look at board and committee structures, skills audits, board meetings, and then also the trustee induction process. And hopefully those topics will build on what you heard earlier from Anna when she talked about diversity and trustee recruitment. The other point that is worth making is my comments on governance are very much coming from a good practice point of view. But first and foremost, you must always ensure that you're complying with your governing document. And as Amy just spoke about, there may be circumstances where you have to update your governing document before you can actually change your governance structure. So it's always important to bear that in mind. Right, so if we start by having a look at board and committee structures, I suppose the starting point is to remember that ultimately the trustee board is responsible for the governance of the charity, and that means running it in compliance with the governing document and the law. And therefore, really, the key focus of the trustee board should be on that overall strategy and performance of the charity and meeting its objects rather than the detailed day-to-day operations. Now, fairly often, I've been asked before whether or not a charity has enough trustees. And the honest answer is it does depend. clearly as a trustee board, you need to have enough trustees to enable you to perform the necessary work in looking after and guiding the charity, and to be able to cope with any changes in the board, so that if 1 or 2 trustees left, for example, that the board could carry on functioning efficiently. But then on the flip side, you do need to be small enough that the board can make decisions effectively. If you go and look at the Charity Commission guidance, that says that every charity should have a minimum of 3 trustees who should be unconnected. But the current recommendation in the Charity Governance Code is somewhere between 5 and 12 trustees being seen as the optimal number. Now, depending on the size of your charity, it could be beneficial to set up some subcommittees to help share the burden, and that obviously lets a smaller group of trustees look in depth at certain areas and then report back to the full board. Now, we probably most frequently see that for like a finance and audit committee, but equally, depending on the nature of your charity, that could be a grant committee, fundraising committee, remuneration committee, and so on. Right. If you go down that route of having a larger structure, then obviously it becomes vitally important that there are very clear terms of reference for what each committee, what the function is and what they're to do, and then an overall scheme of delegation. So that will set out, what matters have to be considered and agreed by the full board, what are being delegated to the respective subcommittees, and what's being dealt with by management. Now, the nature of those could have financial thresholds. So, for example, any purchase over £5,000 has to be approved by the full trustee board. Or alternatively, they maybe could be presented differently, that any expenditure outside of the annually agreed budget has to go to the full board, and so on. Now, unless your governing document says otherwise, there's not actually any legal limit on the length of service of a trustee. However, the Charity Governance Code recommends that if a trustee has served for more than 9 years, then the charity should consider a rigorous review of that person's role and consider the need for refreshing the board. Now, if you're in the position where you've got a very long-serving trustee board and you are looking to refresh it or make some changes, equally you would want to make sure that any appointments are staggered over a period of time, as you wouldn't want several trustees to leave the charity in one go. So that's something that needs to also be planned for, on a longer time scale. It's also necessary, or certainly good practice, for a charity to review its own effectiveness and performance, and that includes of individual trustees, of the chairperson, and then also the board as a whole and how well it works together. And that's probably going to include looking at the skills, experience, and diversity of the board and how well it's working. And in a very small charity, you might do that review simply by individual self-assessment by the trustees and perhaps management, whereas in a larger charity you may have a more formal governance review, perhaps using an external facilitator to help the process. But a key part of that board effectiveness review will be to consider the skills, knowledge and experience of the trustees, and ensuring that you've got the skills on the board to help deliver the charity's purposes. And a good way to consider that is by carrying out a formal skills audit. Now, in an ideal world, you'd be looking to do this on an annual basis, so it shouldn't really just be a one-off process, for example, before recruiting new trustees. Now, if you go online, you'll find various example skills audits available. Reach Volunteering and NCVO both publish quite comprehensive skills audits that you can use, will cover off all the core skills, and then you can tailor them more closely for your charity's needs if need be. And the basic idea is that each trustee goes through and scores their knowledge and experience on various factors, things like governance, leadership, finance, health and safety, and so on. And you do that through detailed questions. So, have you previously chaired a board or a committee? Do you have experience interviewing staff? Do you have experience writing grant applications, and so on? And actually, if you haven't done a skills audit before or not for a number of years, it is definitely worth doing because it can quite often highlight unknown qualities about your existing trustees. Unless your trustee board is very close, it's quite often the case that you might know the other people by their day job and sort of make assumptions about what their skill sets are, but actually people have a much wider experience than that quite often, so you could find out some valuable things. Now, once you've carried out the skills audit, I quite like the idea of colour coding the responses that people give to try and give you a sort of an at-a-glance view of any strengths or weaknesses on the board. Now, this is an incredibly simplistic example, but looking at that, you know, things like governance, accounts, finance near the top there, it's all 2s and 3s, they're slightly stronger areas. But if you look further down, well, marketing and fundraising, we look quite weak in that area. It just helps you and the trustees give a bit more thought to what areas they might need to do something about and have a discussion about. You don't necessarily have to change anything, but it may prompt what you look for in a future trustee, or equally you might be something that you can cover off with some training for trustees as necessary. And I think it is also important to think about the future too and look forward about what you might need. So, you know, as an example, if your chairperson has said they're looking to step down at the end of their current term, you know, do you have another board member who, you know, has got skills in chairing a meeting or leading a committee that might be willing to take over, or is that something that you need to look for over the next year or two? Equally, if you're looking at starting a trading subsidiary or doing some activities of that nature, have you got the business experience on the board to help with that? So it's just important to bear in mind sort of your future needs as well. Okay. Moving on then, just to have a little talk about board meetings. Again, as always the case, starting point is to make sure you know what your governing document says, and if you want to change anything, you may need to update it. In terms of the frequency of meetings, the Charity Commission says you should have a minimum of 2 meetings a year. I would certainly think you ought to be looking at somewhere in the region of 4 to 6 on sort of a general good practice basis. But it is going to be influenced to a large degree by your circumstances. You know, clearly if your charity was having financial issues or going through a period of significant change, then you might want much more frequent trustee meetings, and perhaps even on a monthly basis. Now, Anna mentioned about, you know, supporting diversity and trustee recruitment, and a big part of that is also about making your meetings as accessible as possible. Whilst there's undoubtedly a value to having face-to-face meetings, you know, if some of your trustees are geographically, you know, widespread, then using video conferencing might help increase attendance and also reduce the time burden for those trustees. And it's also worth just asking, you know, what timing best suits the trustee board. You might, you know, automatically default to, oh, well, we always have our trustee meeting at, you know, 4 o'clock on the second Thursday of the month or something. But actually, does that suit everybody? And could you vary it? Whatever timing and dates you agree on, obviously it makes a lot of sense to make sure they're booked well in advance and in people's diaries. And equally, it's very important to make sure you circulate all of the papers for the board in good time. I'd certainly say a minimum of a week before the meeting. You know, if things are emailed around the night before or presented on the actual day itself, then clearly they're not going to be able to be properly considered by the trustees. In terms of the quorum, so the minimum number of people to be able to make decisions, if it's not stated in your governing document and you're a charitable company, then I believe the quorum is 2. The Charity Commission recommends a minimum of 1/3 of trustees should be present. But to be honest with you, if you're in a situation where I would say, you know, less than half your trustees were attending your board meetings, then I think that probably indicates a bigger issue about, you know, the trustee board and how it's operating, and you might need to look at making some changes to try and improve that attendance. Clearly, an agenda for the meeting is vital. it can be quite a good idea to have a pro forma agenda in place that covers off all of the key standing items that each meeting ought to cover, and that then can be just tailored for each meeting to bring in any specific points that need to be discussed. And equally, with all board meetings, a lot does come down to the chair to make sure that that agenda is covered in the time scale, runs on time, and also to encourage as wider participation as possible from everyone involved. Now, making sure you've got good quality minutes are vital, both to sort of clearly document, and support the decisions, and also show evidence of challenge, so to show that the trustees are challenging management and looking at what the charity is doing. And ultimately, once the minutes of the meetings have been written up and approved, they are the only legal record of that meeting. So somewhere further down the line, in the event of, for example, like insolvency or perhaps a legal issue or claim against a charity for whatever reason, those minutes could become very important. So it is really worth focusing on. In an ideal world, it's best if the minutes can be written up by somebody who's not actively involved in the meeting. So if you can have a clerk or a secretary to the trustees doing the minutes, that is probably best. And obviously, those minutes should be written up as soon as possible after the meeting and circulated to all of those attending in order to agree them, while it's still all fresh in the mind, and then obviously signed off by the chair. In terms of the content of minutes, a few points up on the screen. Obviously, things like date, time, and the type of the meeting, who's attending and in what capacity, any declarations or conflicts of interest that need to be brought in mind. You would need to record the wording of any formal resolutions. That may be less relevant to your ongoing board meetings, but for example, at the annual general meeting, and depending on what it says in your governing document, you might need to be a bit more formal if you've got a formal resolution with proposer and seconder, although that will be driven by your governing document and the nature of the meeting. But in all circumstances, make sure there's good details of the decisions made in the meeting and the reason behind those, and make sure all of there's a clear summary of all of the points discussed and any agreed actions. It can be quite nice to put a separate sheet on the back of the minutes that pulls out all of the actions agreed in the meeting just into one place. That makes sure that they're easily picked up at the next meeting and can be followed up. But you can then also note down which trustee or member of staff is going to perform that action, and also put down the due date for that action being completed, just to make sure nothing is missed off. And then obviously also a summary of future meeting dates is also important. Right, as Anna talked about earlier, trustee recruitment is an area where a lot of charities do struggle, and obviously you don't want to be in the position of just taking on anybody who you can, and really you want to be looking to focus on those skills that you need, whether that's come off from your skills audit or your discussions about diversity. Now, in terms of the methods of recruitment, in theory, every charity should already have a method of recruitment in place, and under the charity SORP, you are obliged to disclose that in your trustees report. So all charities have to set out the methods used to recruit and appoint new trustees, and larger charities need to set out the policies and procedures for the induction and training of trustees. However, in all honesty, quite often that narrative tends to be quite brief and is not always thought about in much depth. Perhaps a reference to a discussion with the chair and some signposting to Charity Commission guidance. And I think with that in mind, if you are in need of, if you are looking to recruit more trustees or encourage diversity in the board, a good starting point is to expand that narrative in the trustees report, just to put a bit more information in there about how you'll support new trustees, how people can put themselves forward for being appointed, and the opportunities that those trustees might get to see the charity's work in action. A bit more narrative in that area is really only going to help your cause. But either way, it's obviously important to have a clear process for recruitment and induction, and everybody knows who's responsible for what. Now, clearly, before you appoint a new trustee, obviously worth making sure that they fully understand the likely time commitment of the role and what will be expected of them. So always make sure that's properly discussed in advance before they're actually appointed. And equally, you may need to carry out some vetting of trustees. Might it bring about any conflicts of interest? And if so, how would we manage these? And then equally a few more standard things, checking that they haven't been disqualified as a trustee or a director. And depending on the beneficiaries and who they'll come into contact with, are any DBS checks or other references necessary? Now, in terms of the actual induction process for a new trustee once they've been appointed, ideally every charity should have a basic process in place for that induction, but obviously it's going to have to be tailored to the needs of the individual. So clearly, if you're having a new experienced trustee coming on board who perhaps is a trustee of several other charities, then their induction process is obviously going to be very different to a first-time trustee who perhaps has not done that role before. I suppose I would generally expect the chair to perhaps meet with the new trustee, explain how the charity operates, what its aims and objectives are, and go through sort of the day-to-day governance process. So, how many meetings are there, how many visits is a charity expecting, and so on. I think your trustees ideally ought to be given a formal trustee induction pack. So that could be physical documents, or links to an online database. And I'd expect that to include a copy of the governing document, the most recent statutory accounts, recent minutes of meetings, the long-term strategic plan for the charity, any key policies that are really relevant to the role. So that might be things like safeguarding, conflicts of interest, and then that scheme of delegation and who's who. And again, obligations as a trustee, it's quite good to signpost to the Charity Commission guidance. There is good guidance on there for trustees about the role and the responsibilities that go with it. So that should be directed to the Charity Commission website. And then obviously, depending on the size and nature of the charity, it's very important to create an opportunity to meet the other trustees, key management, but then also ideally, the beneficiaries will see the charity actually performing its work. So, if a new trustee can come to your site, see the charity's work in action, that can quite often, generate a lot more enthusiasm in a new trustee than purely a discussion with management or a member of the board. Also worth asking about any ongoing training needs that perhaps that new trustee could have. And as Anna touched on, giving a trustee a buddy can also be very useful. Now that could just be, someone to have an informal chat through with before the next board meeting and to talk about the process, or it could be, someone that a new trustee can speak to on a more regular basis, or if they want some guidance on the charity's processes, or who to talk to about a particular issue. So I think having a trustee buddy is also very useful. Finally then, when you get the slides afterwards, I've put a couple of pages in of useful links. So some useful links to Charity Commission guidance relevant to the points that I've talked about, and then also some links to free online resources about recruitment and skills audits and such like, which also you might see useful. Right. I can see there are lots of questions, Louise, so I hope you can help me with these.
There are. Thank
See
you.
how we go.
Thank you, Darren. I think because we need to close in a couple of minutes, what we'll do is if we don't get to all of the questions, we will answer them in an email that goes out with the slides and with the recording. So you might have seen right at the beginning, some people were asking about the slides. Those will be circulated for both this week's session and next week's session because you have registered for those. So we'll try and cover off a couple now, and then as I said, we might have to cover off the rest by emails later. So the first one was, is a skills audit a requirement?
It's certainly good practice, and obviously I think the trustees are ultimately responsible for making sure the charity fulfills its objects and that they appropriately safeguard the assets of the charity and so on. And I think in order to do that, you need to be happy as trustees that you've got the skills to do it. So perhaps not a prescriptive requirement, but certainly very good practice and a way of you looking at, you know, what skills the trustee board has got.
Yeah, thank you. And I think if people are looking at the Charity Governance Code, there are different recommendations depending on the size of the charity. So I would sort of refer them there really to see what is deemed to be best practice for that. There's just a couple of questions here, which I think we can probably cover off together. So shouldn't the governing document state a minimum quorum number? And then there was also a question regarding the ideal notice period for calling a meeting. So for example, an EGM or something like that. And again, I would say that both of those should be covered in the governing document. I think for companies, there are statutory requirements in terms of who can call a meeting, for example, 5% of the members able to vote at that meeting and that kind of thing. But I would definitely refer you to your governing document for both of those questions. I don't know if you've got anything to add to that, Darren.
Yeah, no, I think I would say the same. Like you say, for companies, there's certain aspects that are stated in company law about some of those matters. So if it isn't, you know, immediately evident in the minutes, sorry, in the governing document, it can be behind that. But generally speaking, yeah, your governing document, I would expect does pick those up.
Great. I think we'll pick up the other questions, if that's okay, after the session. Just one of the questions was, are we able to provide the recording to future or pending trustees of our charity, or is it restricted solely to the registered trustees? Obviously, Reed's stepped in there, so yes, you're able to share, basically. Share away, and I hope some of you can join us next week, but again, you'll receive the recording of that. So I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for attending. I hope this morning's been useful. There's certainly a lot of content. I've learned a lot, which is always great. Thank you to our presenters. And if you have any questions, please contact us as per our details in the slides. Thank you very much.